welcome back. Today I'm here to reveal something kind of exciting. You may or may not have heard of this deck, but I have here the prototype of the Pacific Northwest Tarot deck. Now this deck was created by Brendan Marnell. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, Brendan. And on Instagram, the tag is bren.marn, and I'll put all of the information below. As I say, this is a prototype deck which myself and a handful of other people were sent. We were, I would imagine in the same way that I was, approached by Brendan. I had been following the creation of this deck on Instagram because, as many know, I'm very fanatic about animal decks, picky but fanatic. And I've just been loving the choices, the discussion about the choices and the artwork, and Brendan approached me and asked if I'd be interested in being one of the prototype people who had a look at the deck, played with it, shared it with others, promoted it, fed back any sort of information to him about my experience and all of that good stuff. And I gladly accepted because this, as I say, is a deck that I was already really interested in. So as you can tell in the title, what's contained in this deck is the landscape, animals and other sort of flowers and things that are found in the Pacific Northwest. So you may or may not be familiar with some of them. There were a few of them that when I initially went through, I wasn't quite sure. I do now have a rough draft of the PDF, so I have a good idea of what everything is. That filled in a few of those question marks, which is good. This deck is going to be coming to Kickstarter on June 8th. I will share all of the information below if it's something that interests you. That's all to say that when I take you through this deck, really what we're just going to be looking at is the artwork and discussing some of the choices. This is more a second look for me. I did a first impressions yesterday over on Instagram. I did an Instagram live, which is now replayable on my IGTV. If you would prefer sort of to hear my first impressions. Brendan also popped in for 20 minutes, half an hour, which was kind of cool. However, the video quality over there just doesn't do it justice. But one thing is worth noting, this deck is not printed on what the final cardstock is going to be on. It's not even the same printer. There's going to be a much more luxurious cardstock, I'm told. There will be enhancements to the cards. Obviously the quality of the print, when you print out prototype decks, really you just want to get it in your hands and have that sort of overall feel. So I'd imagine that's what Brendan did. As you know, I'm not really a first impressions unboxing kind of person. I much more prefer reviews, but in this instance I feel like it's something quite exciting to share with you. I'm enjoying keep going through it. I want to use it as much as I can so that I can feedback, so that I can really get a lay of the land, as it were, in this deck. And that's what we're doing, just a fun hangout going through the cards. If you've got any questions, you can sort of send them my way, and if I can't answer, then I will send you Brendan's way. Other than that, here we go. This is what the card back is going to look like. Brendan was kind enough to send a few spares because the rest of the deck has got prototype written on the back. But this is going to be it. So for those who feel like they like reversible card backs, or if you don't particularly like writing, I'm not a fussy card back person, but I do enjoy a simple aesthetic if I'm going to be fussy. And also I feel like this is very aligned with the deck naturally, and it's got that sort of cyclical feel to it. So there are the back of the cards. If you're wondering what these are, that's just some more card backs. It's going to be more obvious, I would imagine, from some animals to others, what animals are. I'm not going to name every single one, but we'll see how we go. So we've got the 𝗚, and this is a beautiful sea otter. I don't want to give away too much about the deck guidebook because I know that it's a work in progress. But what I will say is there's going to be sort of a lovely story tale kind of feel section on the animals, you know, a nice small paragraph explaining the choices, so that if you're not familiar with them or you want to know more of why he chose them for the particular cards, then you're going to have that information. Also, one of the other things I will say is that when plants are featured in here, as far as I'm aware, the plants will be identified in the book too. So that's a really lovely addition. At least that's my understanding anyway. There are a few cards where there are just flowers, and they are definitely identified at least. And you'll have started to notice maybe that every now and then there's a small symbol in the card, sort of helping you to add something, I suppose, to the messages, especially those wanting a little extra guidance or a little extra heads up. I feel like for beginners, the guidebook's going to be a big help, or for those sort of learning to lean into animal medicine, because what you'll see from this deck is whilst there's lots of movement, and it's something that I commented on yesterday in my live and really appreciated it, there is, and they're animated and there's feeling in the representations as well, at least in my opinion. For some who are new, they may need to lean into the guidebook to help you to begin to explore why that animal might be showing up in that card, because as you can see, it's not sort of your traditional 𝗪𝗿𝗺𝗀𝗺. Although there are certainly hints to that, I do really enjoy in the lovers with these grey foxes the autumnal leaves and then the blossom. So we've got sort of the duality between autumn and spring. I really appreciate the borders as well in this sort of, it's almost not a border, but I'm sure people will call it a border still, and how things are splaying outside of them as well. It doesn't feel intrusive, but I do feel it just adds something. We've got the beautiful grey wow, and I was saying yesterday, what's interesting about this is you've got the sort of herd movement, and that adds something to it, especially for those who feel that one animal doesn't really represent what they want to see. I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, this strength card is salmon, and if that's the case, that makes lots and lots of sense to me. Salmon have a really hard journey, actually. Just the whole process of their life is particularly challenging, at least in my opinion, from sort of reading about them and watching documentaries about them. And I like that this deck, one of the things that made me interested in this, other than what I've said already, is the fact that there are, again, interesting and sometimes less familiar picks in certain cards. So for example, strength, we often see a lion in strength. There are a few other animals that are somewhat common in cards as well. So strength, if it doesn't have that, sometimes it will have a bear for strength, or sometimes the bear is the hermit. And what I was saying is I really appreciate those ones where, there you go, we've got the bear for the hermit. I think this is a black bear. I really appreciate it when they have these animals, because there's a reason that they are heavily used in those decks. That is a very, I guess, universally known behavioural trait about the animal, or something that quite a lot of people are familiar with, or one of their more dominant traits. But at the same time, there's also all of these nuances, and when people mix that up in their decks, I appreciate that too. It might throw people who are less familiar with the animals, but I think, as I say, good guidebook really helps with that, and I have every faith that this will be able to do the trick. I haven't seen the finished piece yet, but definitely that's my feel so far. This is, for those who can't tell, this is actually a snail, and I love this, not just for the sort of spiral energy, but it's really interesting to see the snail in the Wheel of Fortune, and I know that for some of the cards there's these really interesting personal stories as well. As I say, I don't want to talk about all of them. I have lingered on some more than others. This is the only name change in the whole entire deck, so again, beginners are going to feel quite comfortable with the terms across the board on the cards, but I do appreciate this name change. It's one of my favourites, and it's personally my preferred term for this card now. And I'm not going to repeat, for those who maybe want to still watch this video, what I said about the Hanged One being the sort of caterpillar but in the chrysalis phase. But this makes a lot of sense, and I feel speaks to some of the more challenging and difficult aspects of the Hanged One, and not simply the sort of suspension elements, I suppose. Oh, I've picked up a couple. We've got Death, which is the mushroom. There's so many layers that you can read into this, and I will say it again, if you're not familiar with how mushrooms or fungi, or whatever you want to call them, if you're not familiar with how they work and how they sort of serve the environment around them, it's really quite fascinating. They are such a necessity, and for those who are sort of split, I suppose, between some really want the Death card to be in the grieving and just sitting with the pain and the loss of death. Some feel it's more of a midway sort of liminal space between that and sort of moving into rebirth and the transitional elements and the uplifting potential. These cards are quite open to interpretation, I feel, for those kind of things. So more readers are probably going to be able to project or see what they want from the cards within them, and mushroom kind of makes space for all of that. Temperance with a painted turtle, which I was really excited about. Very, very interesting depiction for temperance. So the Devil card I've just checked, and these are Japanese beetles, and they're on a hops plant. And you can see that they are just living their normal best life, going about doing what comes natural to them. But of course, for the observer, especially gardeners, I know that there are some gardeners now who sort of work with the ecosystem, but I also appreciate that too many of something on your plants is going to end up with them all eaten up, and there are feelings about that for many gardeners. I am not a gardener. But I think that this is a really interesting choice for the Devil card, and how humans perceive animal behaviour versus, I guess, how animal behaviour just exists of its own accord. This is a giant sequoia, and there's a real presence for this Tower card. What's interesting is it's quite different from other trees that I've seen in Tower cards, in that it's not struck by lightning or in flames or broken or anything like that, but there is this kind of dry forest fire feeling going on in the background, and I think that that's going to be discussed in the book as well. So it's still there, but it's an interesting perspective of it, at least visually. And we've got a mourning dove for the star. I'm here for some doves and pigeons in our decks. We've got a loon for the moon. There's a couple of images that have got these reflective patterns in them, and I really enjoy how he adds them into his artwork. And we've got a swan for the sun, which I feel again is a nice, interesting mix up for animal decks and what may commonly be shown in the sun card. We've got Judgment. And one of the things that I noticed is in the Hanged One, obviously we've got the chrysalis phase, and then in the Judgment card we've got the butterfly fully formed. I don't know if they're meant to be the same one, but I do love sort of pulling those stories together or any parallels that come through in decks. And I believe that this is a rose, and one of my favourite colour roses as well. Not that that's important, but we finish up with a world card, and this is a lovely depiction, I suppose. There's a lot of myth and story as well that could possibly take you in all sorts of fun avenues with the world card. Also, whilst I love those fantastic landscape pictures that we again commonly see in the world card, because it's been done, it's nice to see someone mix that up a bit. Moving into the wand suit, one of the things that you'll see is that every single ace again has a plant on it, and this I believe is a canna. The plants are probably the things that I'm least familiar with because of course it's not my region and I haven't studied plants and just that kind of botanical aspect in as many regions as I have animals. But I believe that's what I read this is, so hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. But I enjoy that for the aces. It kind of makes them stand out, I suppose, amongst the rest of the minor arcana. I'm going to show these two together because they sort of tell a story. They're both red-tailed hawks, but this is a fledgling. So you've got that kind of prepared but not quite there energy, I suppose, or preparing rather. And then with the three, you've got an adult red-tailed hawk and they're flying off on their adventures. I love the story weaving. It's not through all of the cards in that way, but when it is done, it makes a lot of sense. And I never tire of hearing discussions about the differences between the 2 and the 3 of wands, because I know that it's something that people express feeling, I guess, somewhat confused between the 2 of them. So I think that when creators do stuff like that, it really helps people to differentiate and to learn how to differentiate for future readings and decks. We've got some beautiful foxes again, and there's no surprise that I'm going to gush about this, so I'll try not to for too long. But these are red foxes instead of the grey foxes on the lovers, but I do appreciate the fox choices on the cards that they're on. And one of the other things that I have forgot to mention is you'll see above the cards is that the placement of the wands or the coins or whatever the suit it is, they change. And so whilst I don't feel that they're easy to sort of forget they're there, to the point of I keep forgetting to mention till I get to like number 4 and I notice this wonderful sort of archway. But I think that this is another nice addition for people who are wanting a prompt or are learning and trying to ignite their understanding of the tarot. I'm thinking especially within the Rider-Waite-Smith system. I don't know, I haven't looked at them sort of with my numerology head on, but either way, they sort of tell a little story. So you've got the balanced or dual nature between those two, and then these ones are there's more movement to them and they sort of look like they've been thrown in the air. And then with the 4 you've got the arch, which kind of reminds me, as I say, of the Rider-Waite-Smith arch. And then you've actually got the cave or forest opening, I can't quite work it out, behind, that gives you or gives me the same sort of feeling. These two having a rough and tumble, I really enjoy. I think for people who enjoy animal decks but struggle to see animals if they're hurt, or the less palatable side of animal nature to, I guess, to humans overall. It's not like I enjoy watching animals fight, I just appreciate that it's a part of nature. But I think that this deck is quite gentle in that way without shying away from it. Also, whilst there's no renames, it does retain that it's a nature deck, and so there's no animals impaled with swords, because the idea of sort of weaponry, especially kind of more medieval weaponry, knocking around is very unlikely that the animal was going to go that way. And therefore, there you'll see in the Three of Swords, this will be a prime example. It may still evoke things in people, but I feel like it's going to be a softer experience overall. I enjoy the colours of these as well, and if you see them all laid out together, whilst they don't cling to just a few colours, they have sort of a theme running throughout. We have our final fox. This is a little kit, and yes, I'm biased. I'm glad that there's 3 foxes in this deck. Not gonna lie. We have our coyote for the night. I appreciate I haven't been telling you all the animals, so that's why I'm just saying some. We have our Queen of Wands, and he's stuck with the black cat, and I'm elated. I really am. I love the black cat imagery, and I know that other people probably will be like, why? You don't even like the traditional 𝗪𝗿𝗺𝗀𝗺, but it is my favourite card in that deck. Loving the 2 different colour eyes as well. And then for our King of Wands, we have our wolf. Moving into the cups, we have this gorgeous hydrangea, and the colours are really something else. If he's saying that the colours are going to be improved in the next unit, well, the official printing, then just wow. Just wow. I just wanted to check the name of these, and they are violet green swallows. I was getting in a tongue tie with the colours. I'm okay for knowing they're swallows, but it was like the violet green. These are beautiful. They're absolutely stunning, and I'm going to leave them out because there is a card connection with those as well. Then the 3 of Cups, and again just drawing your attention to the changes in the top. So now obviously it's with the cups, and I enjoyed that there were 3 different butterflies on this instead of just the one. And if you're curious, yes, even with the insects, he's really specific in the book. So whilst I have sometimes just said butterfly, there are names, so I have pulled them up for you just to give you an example. We've got a pale swallowtail, a Lorcan's admiral, and I don't know how to pronounce this one, so do excuse me, but it's 𝗪𝘁𝗿𝗄𝗄𝗆. Wow. That's just a word with too many vowels, but anyway, they are named and they're in there. So you can really sort of dive into your research if you're an animal nerd like myself as well, which I'm going to enjoy with this, and will do it. I definitely will. This card, it's all sorts of cute and sad at the same time. And again, look at the formation of the cups here. And you can see the tones have really changed in this one from the wands, which are naturally very earthy, warm reds and browns and yellows and oranges, whereas you've got your sort of variations of blues. Still other colours, but I'm on about the dominant tones in all of these. This damselfly is another one of my favourites because it's got that reflective quality. Rather than actually seeing it, we're seeing the reflection upon the water. And even that in itself, for the 7, and what the 7s numerically, or even, as I say in the 𝗪𝗿𝗺𝗪𝗺 encourage us to do, is reflection. That is a part of that, at least for me, so I really love that. I appreciate it. Someone always knocks at the door when I'm recording, but I'm back, and I have the northern alligator lizard, and I love this because it's different to the snake, which I have seen in the Eight of Cups, but we've still got this regeneration, moving on from aspects of even ourselves in this. As you can see, they've left their shed behind, and I really love that metaphor for the Eight of Cups. And then our oyster. And here is the other card. So as I say to you, these cuties were in the Two of Cups, and then here we've got them in the Ten of Cups with their new wee babies. And I think that that's a really beautiful way to pull these two cards together and to tell a story between the two. He doesn't necessarily do it with lots of cards, but when he does do it, it feels really potent. It makes a lot of sense to me. And we move into our courts. So we've got our page. I love the other fish behind, but they're not so much in focus that it feels like we're seeing more than one. And I'm not remembering the name off the top of my head, but this is a type of dolphin. So this was one of the cards that I initially wasn't sure about. And what I was remarking on, however, is the directions, because even those, I feel that there's something to be read from those for me personally. And then we've got this orca for the Queen. And I like that they're going down into their depths. And whilst we do have that traditional, you know, page, knight, queen and king, and I know for many just the titles queen and king can feel very gendered, but I do feel that one of the beauties, hopefully for many of you, if not all, is that the animals allow you to move away from that, and that king can represent anyone and that queen can represent anyone, just as, you know, rightly they should. I'm not saying that there isn't an amazing array of people decks that do it either through renames or from really showing up with their visual representation. There are some amazing people decks that are doing really well across that sort of sphere in some or many of those aspects. But I do feel, as I say, that even though these say queen and king, the animals still allow for that space away from the gendered aspects of those cards. I'd be curious to hear actually if you feel like that helps despite it saying king or queen. I'm always curious to know how people feel about cults, because so many of us read them in such differing ways as well, and even that itself is a big factor in how we approach the cults, I would imagine. I don't approach them as people anyway, in terms of I wouldn't, if you know I get 3 cults, they wouldn't represent 3 people in my life. That's not how I read them. They're more characteristics, and often I'm working within the frame of simply the querent or, you know, myself. So even that, there's a lot of variation and a lot of room. So I'd love to hear, what are your thoughts? King, queen, cults? Does it bother you? How do you feel about those kind of titles? Now we're into the Pentacles suit, and we have the sunflower for our ace. I like that it's not the wands, and again, I am sure I just like to shake stuff up. I like to see them in different places and not the usual, and that's something that I noticed in this as well. This is an awesome picture of a ladybug or ladybird. Dependent on where you live, the names differ ever so slightly, but how often do we see them in full flight with their, you know, their wings on show as opposed to their shell above? I really enjoy that. And paper wasps, because this deck is very insect friendly. There's a lot of bird variety as well. Again, something I appreciate. I have a couple of decks that really lean into more varied animals, and they are standout animal decks for me. So this is certainly in that sort of realm or league. A woodpecker, and you can see these ones are actually still pentacles. I love that, so unintrusive. I think that this 5 is a pronghorn, but I don't have that part of the guidebook up next to me. This is the one that really caught my attention in the pentacles. This is a nurse log, and then down here we have a tiny little red vole. And I will repeat myself for this, because one of the things that I appreciate about this for the 6, and that kind of giving and receiving energy, but also just nature in general, is that everything in nature generally serves a purpose. And so you can see that these logs, despite the log itself being fallen and maybe not that part of the log not growing, we've got all these other aspects flourishing in and around it. We've got moss, we've got fungi, it's a house to animals, it's keeping them safe. There's so much going on here that allows us to understand the ecosystem, to consider how things work, to look at our impact. I know that that's not always why we're coming to tarot, but I mean just, when I'm not using it, but I'm just looking at the card and sort of thinking about all of the things it brings up, that was one of the things. There is so much purpose still that it has to offer. So whilst I said it is an animal deck, but it does explore the landscape and the other plants and such of the region, it has a really nice feel to it in that way. We got our little fuzzy buddy bees there. You can really see, as I say, that they've got character, these cards. I just had a peek, and these are cherries. Rainier cherries or Rainer cherries. And then we have this beauty for the 10, which, do we need words for this? Do we need words? It just reminds me of being in the presence of any huge tree, really, and how many stories and how much longer that they've lived than us as well, and the climate change that they've been through and survived, and the animals that they've housed and that have died or have been born like in or around them. There's so much to be read in this, that I really appreciate this. And I've often found myself a little disappointed that in human decks, it's the 10 often just falls onto a version of a family, and it feels like family is a great space for that card, but there's room for so much more within that as well. And we move into our courts, and how adorable are they? We've got our page. Oh, I've picked a couple up. Our knight. I love the beaver for the Queen of Pentacles. I also enjoy this around, I've noticed it on some of the queens, and then I know that this king also has something somewhat similar. But for me, for the king, it's all about the antlers and how that sort of frames even the energy in between it. And last but not least, onto the swords, and there's 2 names in the guidebook for this. So you've got the star lily or the sand lily. This mole is glorious. And again, the directions of the swords here. And the moon phase is an interesting and appreciated addition. So here's our 3 of swords. And as I say, there's no swords impaling this sweet, sweet bird. But as you can see, they are in fact what I would imagine to be dead anyway. He's really captured the body. And as I say, I know that it will still be difficult for some people. I just find this a very gentle picture, and the petals laying all around them. It actually really reminds me of when I find something and it's not already in a nice resting place. I will actually move them, if I'm able to, into a resting place, whether I have to haul them to my garden if they're not already there, or, you know, to the side of the road. And I think that it's just a nice way to honour them. So that's kind of the feeling that I get when I look at this. How much I would read that in terms of the Three of Swords, I don't know. I haven't really thought about that per se, because the Three of Swords is an interesting one for me, between the visual depictions and the meaning of the card. So I would assume that there is definitely ரிder-Waite-Smith influence in this deck, but I will ask Brendan just out of curiosity anyway. This card just makes me want to sing Under the Sea, and my voice isn't good, so I'm not going to, but there you have it. Those are my feels. This is another one where nature is in fact depicted in all of its elements. So we've got the northern spotted owl, and what they have in their mouth is a flying squirrel. And I appreciate the layers of animal behaviour put in this, and not just that one, you know, those aspects that are more appeasing to us or easier for us to bear witness to. I love this for the Six of Swords and the moving on from one shell to another. And then this stoat is another really good invitation of that behaviour, as I say, because they're taking an egg. The stoat is just being a stoat, but also they're adorable. How could you stay mad at this face? Obviously, if you own the nest, yes, you could stay mad at that face, but as a human looking at the deck, adorable. This is a really, really interesting one for the Eight of Swords. So you can see that they're actually hiding from their prey behind this beautiful cactus. And then we have the Nine with a rattlesnake. And whilst I'm always one to say, you know, there are animals that have these really heavy sort of stigmas attached to them, and snakes are one of those, I don't feel like this is portraying the snake in a bad way. This certainly invites me to think about the way that we think about animals, and the way that we obviously can understand that some of them are a danger to us, but what we do with that information and how that sort of then goes from a thought process into our actions. And that's quite, for me, an apt exploration of the Nine of Swords, obviously lacking some of the additional nuance depending on the question and such. But and then we've got the 10, and we've got the bones of the bighorn sheep. A good 10 for those who are reading from other systems that don't read the completion of that 10 of Swords in the way that the ரிder-Waite-Smith often depicts it. It's certainly something that I'm not particularly married to, and I feel like, again, this is much more open to interpretation, and it's still got that completion element. And finally, we move into the courts. We got a little horned lark. I think that this is Brendan's profile picture. So I'll be curious to know if this was randomly picked or if there's a specific connection to this card. And look at the movement and the intention and just the directness of the Knight of Swords. It's like, this means business. This is kind of I saw it and just my hair's sort of prickled. And then there's a snowy owl, which I'm all about. I'm all about the snowy owl for the Queen of Swords. And finally, this absolutely breathtaking heron for the King of Swords, which I spoke about on the live. And I've rambled a lot, so I should probably stop. But there you have it. that, my lovelies, is the Pacific Northwest Tarot. It's heading over to Kickstarter on June the 8th. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. If you want to have a discussion with me about it, whatever you want to know, then do comment below and get involved and have a chat with me. And as I say, if I don't know, I'll either redirect you or I'll try and find out. And yeah, other than that, have a lovely day and I'll catch you all again soon.